The first time Emily Carter realized she was falling in love with him, he was asleep. Not the peaceful kind of sleep people drift into after a long day. This was the fragile, uncertain kind that came after painkillers, surgeries, and nights spent fighting to stay alive. The hospital room glowed softly in the middle of the night, machines humming in quiet rhythm beside him. Rain tapped against the windows overlooking downtown Boston, and the world outside kept moving while room 614 seemed frozen in time. Emily stood beside the bed, adjusting his blanket, careful not to wake him. His face looked different when he slept. Softer, younger, less guarded. The arrogant smile he usually wore was gone. So was the sarcasm he used whenever doctors mentioned recovery or physical therapy. In sleep, Daniel Reed looked less like the powerful corporate attorney everyone feared, and more like a man, exhausted from carrying too much alone. A small photo had slipped from the edge of his bedside table. Emily picked it up carefully. A little girl with curly brown hair grinned back at her from the picture while sitting on Daniel's shoulders. For weeks, Emily had heard him mention her between treatments. "My daughter loves pancakes. She starts second grade next month. She thinks I'm stronger than superheroes." Every sentence about his daughter sounded like a confession, like he was terrified he might not survive long enough to keep his promises to her. Emily gently placed the photo back where it belonged. Then Daniel stirred slightly, eyes half opening. "You always sneak in when I'm asleep?" he whispered weakly. Emily smiled despite herself. "Part of the job. You smile differently at night." Her heart skipped. Nurses weren't supposed to notice things like that, especially not about patients, especially not about him. 3 months earlier, Daniel Reed had arrived at Mercy General after a devastating car accident on an icy highway outside the city. Multiple broken bones, internal bleeding, severe complications. Most people assumed his recovery would be quick because he was wealthy. But pain doesn't care about money, neither does loneliness. Daniel's wife had died 2 years earlier from cancer. Since then, according to his medical chart and whispered conversations between doctors, he had buried himself in work while trying to raise 7-year-old Sophie alone. The accident nearly destroyed what was left of him. At first, Daniel had been impossible, rude, angry, cold. He snapped at nurses, refused therapy sessions, and spent hours staring blankly at the television without really watching it. But Emily understood grief better than most people. 5 years earlier, her fiancé had died suddenly from a heart condition, just 3 months before their wedding. Since then, she had learned something painful about broken people. Sometimes anger is just sadness wearing armor. So she stayed patient. When Daniel refused meals, she brought him soup anyway. When he pushed everyone away, she still asked how he was feeling. And slowly, almost without either of them noticing, the walls around him began to crack. One afternoon during physical therapy, Daniel collapsed back into his wheelchair, breathing hard. "I can't do this," he muttered. Emily knelt beside him. "Yes, you can. You don't understand." "No," she said quietly. "I probably understand more than you think." Something shifted in his expression then. Not pity, recognition. After that day, he started waiting for her, not in obvious ways, small ways, saving stories for her shifts, pretending to complain about hospital food just to make her laugh, asking about her day even when he was hurting. And Emily hated how much she looked forward to room 614, because feelings like that were dangerous. One snowy evening near Christmas, Sophie visited the hospital carrying a paper bag decorated with crayons and stickers. "Daddy says you're his favorite nurse," she announced proudly. Daniel looked horrified. "Sophie." "It's okay," Emily laughed. Sophie climbed onto the bed beside her father and handed Emily a folded piece of paper. Inside was a child's drawing. 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a giant yellow sun. "That's you," Sophie explained, pointing at the tallest figure. "And that's Daddy, and that's me." Emily's throat tightened instantly. Children had a terrifying way of seeing truths adults tried to hide. Daniel looked away first. That night, after Sophie left, silence filled the room. Then Daniel spoke softly. "She likes you?" Emily forced a smile. "She's sweet." She hasn't smiled this much in a long time. Neither had he, and that scared Emily more than anything. Because somewhere between late-night conversations and shared grief, she had stopped seeing him as just a patient. She saw the exhausted single father trying desperately to stay strong. The man who secretly donated, money to struggling families in the pediatric cancer wing without telling anyone. The man who cried silently one night after hearing another patient had died. The man who still carried his wife's wedding ring in his wallet because he couldn't bear throwing it away. She saw all the fragile, beautiful pieces hidden beneath the pain, and she loved him for them. The realization shattered her. Hospital policy strictly prohibited romantic relationships with patients. But it wasn't just the rules. Emily knew people in vulnerable situations often confused gratitude with love. Trauma created emotional bonds that didn't always survive reality. So she pulled away, slightly at first, then more. She stopped lingering after shifts, kept conversations shorter, avoided looking at him too long. Daniel noticed immediately. One afternoon he finally asked, "Did I do something wrong?" The hurt in his voice nearly broke her. "No." "Then why does it feel like you disappeared?" Emily looked down at the clipboard in her hands. "Because if I stay, I'll lose myself in you. Because loving you feels unfair. Because you deserve a real life outside these hospital walls." But she couldn't say any of that. So instead she whispered, "You're getting better. You don't need me as much anymore." Daniel stared at her for a long moment, then nodded once. That hurt worse. A week later, Daniel was discharged. The entire staff gathered near the nurses' station as Sophie ran through the hallway cheering, "Daddy's coming home!" Emily stayed behind the counter pretending to organize paperwork. Daniel approached slowly with a cane in one hand. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world around them faded into background noise. "You saved my life," he said quietly. Emily shook her head. "You saved yourself." "No." His eyes locked onto hers. "You reminded me why I wanted to survive." Her chest ached so hard she thought she might cry right there. Sophie tugged gently on Daniel's sleeve. "Daddy, we gotta go." He nodded but didn't move immediately. Then softly he asked, "If things were different, would this have mattered to you too?" Emily looked at him, at the hope in his eyes, at the future she wanted so badly it physically hurt. And with every ounce of strength she had, she smiled sadly and stepped back. "Goodbye, Daniel." The word crushed them both. He waited another second, as if hoping she'd stop him. She didn't. So he turned and walked away, and Emily let the love of her life leave forever. For months afterward, she questioned herself constantly. Maybe she should have called. Maybe she should have fought for it. Maybe timing wasn't supposed to matter when love was real. But deep down, she believed letting him go had been the kindest thing she could do. Daniel deserved the chance to rebuild his life without confusing recovery with romance. And Emily needed to know her feelings weren't born inside grief and fluorescent hospital lights. Life moved forward the way it always does, slowly, painfully, until one spring afternoon nearly a year later. Emily had just finished grocery shopping when she heard a familiar little voice yell across the parking lot. "Emily!" She turned instantly. Sophie came sprinting toward her, curls flying wildly in the wind. Behind her stood Daniel, healthier now, stronger. But the moment their eyes met, Emily realized something terrifying. Time hadn't erased anything. It had only made it clearer. Daniel approached carefully, almost like he feared she might disappear again. "You look happy," Emily said softly. "I'm trying to be." There was an awkward pause. Then Sophie grinned mischievously. "Daddy talks about you all the time." Daniel sighed. "Soph." "What? You do?" Emily laughed before she could stop herself. And suddenly, for the first time in almost a year, everything felt easy again. Daniel studied her quietly. "I spent months convincing myself what I felt in that hospital wasn't real," he admitted. Emily's breath caught. "But then life went back to normal." He smiled faintly. "And somehow I missed you even more." Tears burned behind her eyes. "Daniel, I know the timing was wrong before," he said gently. "Maybe you were right to let me go." The ache inside her deepened. Then he stepped closer. "But I'm not your patient anymore." Silence. Warm spring wind drifted through the parking lot while the city moved around them. Emily looked at Sophie, smiling between them. At the man she had loved enough to lose. And finally understood something beautiful. Sometimes letting someone go forever is the very thing that gives love a second chance.